That's why we say jury selection is really jury deselection, because you're really trying to eliminate
the people you don't want.
You're not picking jurors. You're trying to eliminate jurors that are bad for your case, so you ultimately end up with a good jury.
Got it.
Well, first of all, I never knew there were jury consultants.
How do you pick the people for the mock trials? And can I sign up?
Now, if you're not ready, then go ahead and just tell me you're not ready.
I object to you getting records. You've been intrusive into people's personal lives.
In other words, the car didn't hit him, and he wasn't hit by the car.
I'm not a lawyer, but
are y'all keeping up?
I'm not a lawyer, but
The Debrief.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of I'm Not a Lawyer, but
The Debrief.
I am Melanie, aka I'm Not a Lawyer, but, and I'm joined by my co-host.
Gooseby. How y'all doing?
We are not lawyers or legal experts at all, but we consume ourselves with all of that kind of content and then get on this podcast and tell you about it. And every now and again, we have some great guests to join us who are more experts than we are to answer any questions that you guys have and just have kind of insightful and thoughtful conversations.
Yes.
And so we're not going to have our regular segments. We have the mini bar, the sidebar, open bar. Today is all open bar because we have a very special guest joining us. His name is Richard Gabriel, and he is a jury consultant who has assisted on cases such as the Aaron Hernandez trial, the Casey Anthony trial, O.J. Simpson, Phil Spector, Kwame Kilpatrick, and other very high-profile civil and criminal matters. So we are so excited to be joined by Mr. Gabriel. Thank you for being here.
Not at all. Good to be with you.
Oh, I thought you were going to say something.
No.
You good? So we want to jump right in. We have a ton of questions because so many of us have never been jurors. I have never been. And so just from watching, obviously consuming this kind of content, we get an idea, but to have someone who really understands the process is such a privilege. So can you first tell us, what is a jury consultant? Like, what do you do?
We get asked that question quite a lot. A lot of people say, what is it exactly that you do? I like to think of us as translators.
Okay.
So a juror walks into a courtroom and they are really in a foreign land. They don't know where they are. They're with a bunch of people that are not speaking their language. And so we have sort of a dual translation role. One is to help them better understand what the process is. And by doing that, we're also helping our clients, the lawyers, to better understand how a jury thinks, because a jury thinks very differently than how a lawyer or a judge thinks. They're not trained in all the law in there. So we're sitting there translating for the lawyer, saying, here's how a jury's likely to think of that issue. Here's what you might want to think about in terms of picking that jury. And we're also helping our clients better understand the jury. We're helping the jury to better understand the case.
Okay. And when you say lawyers, can both sides hire jury consultants, the defense and the prosecutors?
Yeah. Typically, I mean, again, this happens mostly in civil cases.
Okay.
Civil cases typically have more trial consultants. We typically think of ourselves as trial consultants, but you typically have them on both sides. But sometimes just one side will have them, sometimes another side, sometimes in a criminal defense case, both the prosecutor. In high profile cases, a lot of times, both sides will have a jury or a trial consultant involved.
Got it. Okay.
So how is the jury consultant compensated? Who pays the jury consultant, the government or the lawyer themselves?
Or the defendant?
Well, it depends. When you're hired by the government pays. When you're hired in a criminal case, in a civil case, either side pays, whether it's the attorney who's representing the plaintiff, sometimes will hire you, and then that comes out of whatever recovery they get. The defendant will typically pay you as well. And then sometimes the criminal defendant will obviously foot the bill. But we also do a lot of pro bono work, which sometimes when you cannot afford a trial consultant, we do believe that everybody deserves to have that kind of service if you can. So whenever possible, we try to do that as well.
Okay.
Cool.
Can you, maybe you answered this a little bit in that first answer. When in the process are you contacted? Is it before, like very early pretrial? I guess obviously before the jury is kind of picked. Like when are you contacted to be brought in?
Well, our preference is always to be brought in early in the process because we like to get involved in the case. We like to know the lay of the land. Sometimes they do call us very late, sometimes even like a few weeks before the trial and say, can you do this? But, and we do a variety of things. Obviously, we're probably better known for selecting juries, but we also, that's only a portion of really what we do. So a lot of times what we're doing, especially in the civil cases, is we're hired to come in and we do focus groups or mock trials to actually hire jurors to be our sort of surrogate or mock jurors in a case. We put on a full-blown trial for them, watch them deliberate, talk to them afterwards, find out what pushed the buttons, what were the things that they liked, didn't like, what were things that really bothered them, help to develop sort of a jury profile of good jurors and bad jurors for the case. So we like to do that early on. Sometimes we'll even work with witnesses. If there's a witness who's not particularly good at communicating, we'll help them to try and be more effective in terms of how do you tell your story, basically, in court. And then we obviously are involved in the jury selection. And we also spend time. I mean, I also like to think of us as storytellers. Again, the lawyers, they think in terms of evidence and law, but jurors process cases as a story. They want to know what happened here, just like all of us do. And so we help them to tell the story that we think will best represent their client.
This is
I know
entire world.
I know, you just blew my mind a little bit. I was like, focus groups. This is great.
This is that blows my mind.
Full on mock trials with people.
But yeah, the crazy thing is sometimes these cases, obviously somebody's life is on the line.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sometimes in these big civil cases, there's a ton of money that's at stake. And so lawyers, they're involved for a couple of years. They're thinking, okay, here's what the evidence is. I've been involved in all these motions to try and but that's not what the jury thinks. They don't even know until they go there. So they said a lot of times they'll say, well, let's try and figure out what's important to the jury.
Yeah.
Because what's important sometimes to the lawyers is not important to the jury.
Right.
And so this is how you collect data. Like you're able to, hey, this jury or their demeanor, we need to find another jury with the same demeanor and outlooks as this guy to help benefit the case.
Well, yes, we're looking at demeanor, but a lot of what we're trying to do when we're picking jurors is we are trying to better understand the person. So yes, when doing jury selection, we are doing internet searches. We're taking a look at their Facebook pages, and their Instagrams, and their X, feeds and stuff like that to kind of get a sense how do they communicate, how do they talk to people. It's all public information.
Yeah.
And we're not trying to pry or anything like that, but whatever's public, we take a look at. But more importantly, we're trying to design questions for the attorneys to ask in the voir dire process to really find out, how do you think about these major issues in the case? Because people's beliefs and their life experiences are much more predictive of their inclination in terms of how they may vote on a verdict than, whether they're old or young or black or white or whatever it is like that.
Yeah.
See, that's what we're really trying to figure out is, who is this person? how are they going to interpret the evidence in the case? What are their personal experiences or beliefs that are going to affect the way that they think about this case? And that's what more determines how we then say, pick that person or strike that person as we go into jury selection.
Can I ask, you talked about voir dire, which is, we hear that term a lot. A lot of people can't pronounce it. Sometimes I can't. Can you talk about what that process is? Is it, in my mind, let me paint my picture, and then you can poke all the holes. In my mind, right? I'm regular citizen. I get my jury summons. I come if they tell me not to come, or if they don't tell me not to come, then I show up on that day and I go into a courtroom, and I'm very scared and intimidated by the whole process. I'm there with a group of people, and then you're there asking me questions about where I work and if I know people in law enforcement. And then I either am stricken and told to go home, or I'm moved to a second round, and that process continues. That's what happens in my mind. But can you tell us what actually happens?
So it's pretty close. I mean, so yes, you're called in there. Your representation of what jurors think is absolutely accurate. Oh my God, I'm kind of intimidated, or oh my God, I really don't want to be here. I've got people to take care of, things to do. I've got work to do. It's too much of a hassle and stuff. It's fascinating though. No juror actually really wants to be there, or very few. Mm-hmm. Once they're involved, it's actually a fascinating process. And most jurors go, this was pretty amazing. Wow. Because you're charged with making a decision about somebody's life. A really important decision. And you're working with a group of people you've never met before. And you're sitting there going, it's an important process. Yeah. That being said, the voir dire process, yes, you're sitting there. The judge will then introduce the parties. Does anybody know anybody? If you do, obviously you probably dismissed at that point. And then the judge will read you a little bit about the case, just a short summary of what the case is. Okay. And then the judge will ask you some questions, a little bit about your, where do you work? Do you have kids? A little bit about where do you live? Okay. And then the attorneys get the chance to talk to you. Well, sometimes they do. Sometimes the judge asks all the questions and the attorneys just have to pick. Okay. But sometimes the attorneys then get to ask you questions. Usually it's a short amount of questions. And they're trying to find out a little bit more about you and how you see the world. Okay. I mean, let's say it's in a criminal case. They want to find out whether you've had, friends or family that have had interactions with law enforcement. Mm-hmm. What have been your positive, negative, things like that? Have you been a victim of a crime? Mm-hmm. Because obviously those experiences will inform how you see what the evidence is in the case. Right. Then you're asked questions. If I'm doing my job and the attorneys ask the right questions, they ask about what do you think? What do you think about the criminal justice system? So they're asking attitudes as well. Okay. So you're really trying to find out what people believe and what they've been through in their lives. And then once you ask those questions and the jurors talk to you, you get to the process where you're asked, the parties then say to the judge, look, we've got this one juror. They said they had this really terrible, they were a victim of a crime. Mm-hmm. And they said they might be able to be fair, but this is tough for them. Yeah. We'd like to excuse them for cause. In other words, the judge can then dismiss them and say, you're probably not the best juror for this. It will affect your ability to be fair and impartial. Got it. If the judge says, no, this juror is going to be fine, each side then typically gets a series of what we call peremptory challenges. Okay. Which means, and it can be a variety. It can be a little bit, it can be a lot. And each side gets the chance to kind of go, I'm going to strike this one person because I just don't think they're going to be good for my case. Okay. And they get a certain number of those strikes. And then hopefully, that's why we say jury selection is really jury deselection, because you're really trying to eliminate
the people you don't want.
You're not picking jurors. You're trying to eliminate jurors that are bad for your case. So that you ultimately end up with a good jury.
Got it.
Mm.
Got it. That makes sense. That was helpful, actually, to understand.
To be so involved in the jury selection, there could be some type of corruption going on sometimes with that type of situation there, couldn't it? Couldn't the jury consultant say, ask certain questions and keep the person they want because they want a certain outcome in the case? That
Is that corruption though? Isn't that the point?
I mean, that's what I'm saying. But they could help the bad guy or bad girl win.
So you've hit a very interesting question there. So our system of advocacy says, yeah, I am there to try and pick the very best jury for my client. The other side's doing the exact same thing.
Yeah.
And so both sides are trying to do that. If I'm representing a person, the prosecution always wants to convict them. My client's entitled to say that they didn't do it. So I want to pick a jury that will give them the outcome they want. The other side's trying to do the same thing. So yes, we are both trying to do it, whether you think it's not corruption. That's part of the system. The system does that. It is a system of advocacy. It is, this. I like to think of it this way. The system of advocacy arrives at what you hope to be this neutral jury. So in other words, if I'm picking people, if I'm deselecting jurors who I think are going to be really bad for my case, and the other side's doing the same thing, typically you do end up with a group of jurors who are more neutral that will decide the case.
Got it.
But that being said, there's a lot of strategy that goes into it. I'm trying to get an advantage. I'm trying to get a better jury to try and do it. And the other side's doing the same thing.
That's good because it's similar to sports. If you allow one person to use steroids, everybody should use steroids. So everybody has the same benefits.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Do you maybe particularly in a civil case, have you looked at, the information and maybe as a part of the strategy based on maybe some information and data and maybe mock trials and all of that, you determine, or do you give the advice that, hey, maybe you actually shouldn't even go to trial and you should settle this because you're not going to be able to get a jury that's going to side with you and what you're saying? Like, is that a part, like, can that happen as well?
We often do that. In other words, that a lot of times when we're doing the mock trials, it's a very good question, because we are a lot of times telling clients, well, what we typically will do, we'll do a mock trial or a focus group. Jurors will go, and we always, when we do it, we like to find out what are our vulnerabilities, what are our weaknesses in the case. So then we go to the client, we go, these are weaknesses, these are some real problems. What do you got? In other words, do you have something to overcome those? Can we work with this? Is there a path that will give you a good outcome in this case?
Yeah.
But sometimes it's like, we don't have it. So that's then the client's decision to say, you know what, we probably should settle this thing. So it happens all the time.
I would hire a jury consultant.
Has he convinced you that his job is very important?
This is outstanding.
Should you go to trial ever?
Because
it's a good idea.
Yeah, because these mock trials are basically giving you the answer, or giving you a up on the case. I've seen this. This is what has happened before. I mean, every point is being hit. So I never knew.
I know.
Well, first of all, I never knew there were jury consultants.
Yeah.
Right.
Second of all, I never knew that you would literally have a mock trial. This is outstanding.
How do you pick the people for the mock trials? And can I sign up?
So we always try to do it wherever the case is going to be held.
Okay.
Whether it's, here in Los Angeles or whether it's going to be in, Chicago or Philadelphia, we are always picking people from the venue, and we're picking people that are likely to show up on a jury. We
Okay.
know, because we've done work on this in most areas of the country, we know typically who shows up at the jury.
Mhm.
So we tell our recruiters, hey, here's the demographics of who we would like to see at this focus group.
Okay.
Let me give you a quick story on
Yes.
why focus groups can really be informative. And it has to do with the Casey Anthony case.
Okay.
So Orlando, Florida, I was working pro bono on the case. She didn't have any money. But we said, look, everybody hates this woman. Everybody thinks she killed her kid.
Mm-hmm.
How is it possible for us to get a fair or an impartial jury when everybody knows about this case?
Right.
So I did an unusual thing. I actually contacted CBS News.
Oh.
And I said, if you guys will pay for our participants of our focus group, you can film the whole thing.
Oh, wow.
Typically, they're obviously very private and stuff.
Yeah.
But we said we need the information. We need to find out how are jurors going to respond to this crazy case where everybody thinks you do. So they did it. They went for it. And we went into Orlando. We hired a bunch of jurors to be our jurors for the day, brought them in and said, okay, Casey Anthony case, you've all heard about it. What do you think? And everybody goes, oh, she's guilty.
Mm-hmm.
And we went, okay, well, what do you think about the press and the media? Oh, it's way overblown. It's been completely unfair. Do you think she can get a fair trial? No, probably not. And I said, okay, well, let me walk you through the case. And I just walked them through because we knew what the prosecution was going to do.
Mm-hmm.
All the evidence had pretty much been developed. It's right before trial. I walked them through the prosecution's case. I didn't walk them through the defense case because we didn't want to reveal anything, but I'd ask questions periodically. And at the very end, I said, okay, based on now what you know about the case, how many of you would convict Casey Anthony of first-degree murder?
Mm-hmm.
And only 3 hands went up.
Really?
And I went, everybody was flabbergasted.
Yeah.
Everybody, the CBS was flabbergasted. The attorneys behind the glass were like, what?
Wow.
We only told them the prosecution's case. How can they?
Yeah.
They thought she was guilty to start with. And so I said, well, what? Why? Talk to me a little bit about what is. And they went, well, some of this doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense. And I said, well, what do you think happened? And they went, well, we think the kid drowned. Because there's a backyard pool in the home. And they said, why is that? Well, the evidence shows that she was actually a pretty good mom. And she really didn't want to get rid of her kid. And so we're not quite sure about the motive. And some of this forensic evidence that the prosecution bringing doesn't really add up. There's no DNA.
Mm-hmm.
And they just said, we think there's something wrong with this family, that there's some weird interpersonal family dynamic going on that didn't allow them to actually just come forward and say she drowned there. And it was just so revealing.
Yeah.
It informed how Jose and the team tried the entire case. And the jury, when they actually decided that case, were initially split the exact same. Only 3 were initially for guilt, and they ended up acquitting her and all this stuff. So it gave us some real insight into why jurors didn't think that and what was important to them.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that is fascinating.
So that is
fascinating.
It is.
Go ahead.
Can I be a jury consultant?
You gonna start
What's
now?
the career path? This is interesting. I would love to do stuff like this.
So I also want to make the point that the other thing that we do in these high profile cases, everybody goes, oh, jury, this, that, and that. Everybody thinks he's guilty. Once jurors get in the room and they know somebody's life is on the line.
Yeah.
or they know that a lot of money's on there, they do take their job incredibly seriously.
Yeah.
It's so different from us sitting at home watching the news and going, "Yeah, I think he's guilty," or "I think she's guilty," or
Yeah.
things like that. So it's why I'm such a big fan of the jury system. I just don't think these days, especially with all that's going on in our country, I just don't think there's that kind of opportunity for a bunch of people from completely different backgrounds
Yeah.
to sit down with each other and make an important decision.
Yeah.
Another question for me. So with this, with the data collection, is there like a software you use to store this information? Because I know you got to go back and refer to it.
So yes, I mean with some of the stuff, when we do the focus groups, we use we collect questionnaire data from jurors.
Okay.
In a system, and then we store that and we can compare that. And here's the charts of how many people said this and how many people said that and stuff. So we use a Qualtrics system that allows us to do that. When we're doing, because sometimes before a trial, we have juror questionnaires, and then sometimes we'll just input that into a Google Sheets, and that allows us to just see whatever the data is that we have from those jurors in that Google Sheet. Some places like King County up in Seattle,
I was just going to say in
they
Seattle.
actually do online questionnaires. So you have all that data on those jurors before you actually go and pick a jury in a civil case.
Got it.
Which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Is
there somebody in our Patreon asked about scientific jury selection, your thoughts on if it's ethical, good idea, but it made me think about the world of AI and if that will be a part of this process. Is there a world in which, because it's so information based, right? It's a lot of data collection. Is there a world in which that becomes a part of the process?
Yes, it is. And it's already being done. I mean, AI is involved in some of this stuff. But the thing I always talk to people about AI and also about data collection is that we sometimes get enamored of big data and, oh my God, the technology is going to somehow give us the answers. I'm going to plug stuff in. It's going to give me the answer. We're in the people business. That's what we are. The computer can't tell you that.
That's true.
The data can't tell you that. Data is different than information, and information is different than knowledge. So we have to really evaluate not just what someone's background is or what they've done in their lives or even what their answers are to questions, but why? What is it about this person? That's my job, is to dig a little deeper and say, oh, these jurors felt this way. It's like in the Casey Anthony case. They thought they couldn't convict her. All right, that's one thing. Why? That tells me something. They wanted to know more about her. They wanted to know more about this family. And so digging into that is not something AI can do.
Yeah.
Because that's evaluating emotional constructs, belief patterns, things like that, which you can't get with a computer.
Yeah. And to the point that you're making, I worked at Netflix for years, and one of the things that we saw is that on Netflix, you have the ability to put shows in your My List, shows that you think you want to watch, right? You hear about it, you put it in your My List. And one of the things that the data showed is many of the people who put things in their My List actually don't go and watch them. They watch other things. Right. And so that just was always interesting because what it tells you is that you almost don't know yourself. You don't know, you think and you think you will do a certain thing. And then when you are put in the scenario and put in the, the actual situation, because you're a person and things affect you differently, you may choose left, but when the whole time you've been screaming, you're going to choose right. So anyway, I think it's such a good point.
I mean, it's really true. I mean, that's why, the research says we're notoriously bad self-reporters. I don't know if it's just because we just don't know ourselves very well.
That's funny.
But you know, oftentimes it's true. You'll ask a juror about this, you know, and they'll tell you something, and then you'll go, no, that's not you. That's not what you really believe. And stuff,
Yeah.
because also there's this the other thing with jurors is there's self-presentation aspect.
Mm.
In other words, they're often asked in court, they're in court, they want to look like I'm a super fair person. I'm like gonna be and so they're asked this question all the time. Oh, you've had all these terrible experiences and stuff like that. Do you think you can be fair and impartial? Oh, of course, yeah, sure. And I'm like, okay, so you're gonna set aside all those terrible experiences,
Right.
and and it's just like, no, you're not. No.
Do you ever find, or how can you tell if people are outside of like being unaware that they are lying? What about people who are intentionally lying? How do you account for that? How do you make sure that you're not getting the person who's really trying to fool you?
So lying is a really interesting thing. Some people they're not lying. They truly believe something, or they think they're not necessarily lying, but they're saying, I will look like an idiot if I say this.
Uh-huh.
So they give a little white lie, or they shade the truth a little bit.
Yeah.
And they just, because they don't want to look like a stupid person in front of the whole room there. There are people who are intentionally, they want to get on a jury, or they want to somehow convince a thing like that. And for that, you have to do two things. One is you have to ask them hard questions. And if you ask them the right question, then you watch them carefully for how they answer it. In a lot of these trials, I'm always looking for the juror who's answering in that too perfect way. Oh, yes, I'm only going to listen to the judge and evaluate the evidence as I get it from the witness stand and make my decision with all the other jurors in the case. All right, you've read that someplace. That's your canned answer.
Yeah.
There. I don't trust that.
Yeah. I love this. We had a question in the Patreon. Someone is asking, do you have an opinion on when trials are very long, take a long time, who do you think has the upper hand, usually the prosecution or the defense?
It really kind of depends. I mean, it depends on how the case is presented.
Okay.
Because some of the prosecution has the upper hand because what they are doing is looks like they've got a lot of evidence. So, you know, to a jury, they can go, wow, that seems like a lot of evidence and stuff like that. So a longer trial can obviously favor the prosecution a lot. That being said, when I was working on the OJ case, the longer trial actually favored us because prosecution said they had all of this extra time to present this stuff, and the cross-examinations took forever and were excruciating. And as a result, the length of time, partly on the fault of the prosecution and partly from our strategy, was about creating reasonable doubt for the jury. So if you just get up on the stand, you go, he has DNA matches and stuff like that. That seems like a simple open, shut, okay, boom, like that. But when you keep Dennis Fung on the stand for 9 days or whatever the heck he was on the stand for, all of a sudden the jurors start looking at this little piece and that doesn't really add up. And they start over scrutinizing it. So even sometimes that length of time can favor the defense.
Got it. You worked on the Aaron Hernandez trial, which is one that I was absolutely fascinated by, as was many people. Anything from that case that you can share? I don't even know that I have a specific question. I just was fascinated and would love to hear about your experience on working on that.
So that was that case. I worked on the second trial.
Okay.
All right. So he was accused of murder. In the first trial, he was convicted. The second trial, he was accused of, after a nightclub incident, going out and committing a murder in a sort of a car related, looked like some sort of gang thing afterwards like that. He was acquitted in that particular case.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't actually there for the jury selection on that, but I spent some time talking to the team because obviously they're very concerned about, he's already been convicted.
Yeah.
Everybody thinks he's a murderer anyways.
Right.
So why wouldn't they think he did this one as well?
Right.
So we talked a lot about sort of how do you present this evidence to show where is the reasonable doubt in this particular one. And I spent some real time with them also trying to help them develop jury selection things. I mean, a lot of times in these bigger cases, because he didn't have, strangely enough, he didn't have any money at that point either. So I was just saying, look, given the pretrial publicity, here's the questionnaire you need to develop. Here's the questions you need to ask in order to try and eliminate the jurors who already think he's guilty.
Got it.
And try and get a fair listening on that case.
Got it. I have to ask, because we've been talking a lot on this podcast about two trials in particular, the Karen Reed trial, as well as the YSL RICO trial. And are you familiar with either or both?
I'm familiar with the Karen Reed case.
Okay.
I'm familiar with how long it took to pick the jury in the YSL case.
Oh my.
So that was astonishing to me. I've never been involved. I hope never to be involved in a 9-month jury selection.
Yes.
Case. That was crazy.
It was. And one of the things that is what, I mean, there's so many wild parts to this case from the moment jury selection began up until yesterday. That's how long it's been crazy. But a lot of jurors during the jury selection process, because they anticipated that this was going to be an 18-month trial, that it was going to take all this time, a lot of jurors were like saying financial hardship. I can't afford to just be coming here and y'all are paying me $25 a day. A lot of other people, it's a rapper, and he's from that city. So a lot of people are familiar with him and his celebrity and his music and all of that. And so I guess one of the things about that process is not only are people not being able to be on the jury or they're being stricken maybe because of their beliefs or whatever, kind of some of those basic questions, but because of the financial hardship, right?
Yeah.
Like everybody doesn't have the ability to not work for 18 months and sit on a trial. And I'm just curious, what do you think about that? It feels, just by that process alone, it feels like you're not getting a fair trial because you're not able to actually pick from jurors that would be best for it. You're kind of left with what's left.
So there's two issues here that you're touching on, which are very important. One has to be, most states are terrible at paying for jury service. I mean, here in LA, I think we get $15 a day or something like that, which is ridiculous.
Yes.
And you can't even buy lunch for that.
Right.
And so in some places, so you are getting a very skewed thing. You know, you're entitled to a representative cross-section of the community there. But if the representative cross-section can't afford to sit as a jury, you're not getting that representative cross-section.
Right.
So you're getting retired people, maybe government workers that obviously have unlimited jury service, sometimes teachers, sometimes things like that. So it really does skew that. I think serious consideration needs to be given for increasing juror pay. We just did this whole project called the Trust and Justice Project. Okay. Because there's with all that's going on in this country, there's a lot of mistrust of all institutions, of the justice system in general. And one of those things is people feel just dissociated from it. They don't feel like they can actually participate. If we aren't paying jurors to participate, they can't afford to do it. Yep. So we need to increase juror pay. That's one thing. The other thing is we're also sometimes not getting the jury summons process is not getting to jurors who are representative cross sections, especially in sometimes underserved and minority communities. Yeah. And that's where the jury summons process needs to bring in that. And I saw this sometimes when I was on the Kwame Kilpatrick case.
Mm-hmm.
It was a federal case in Detroit.
Mm-hmm.
Very, obviously a high population of Black folks in Detroit.
Yep.
But in federal cases, most of them just didn't show up for jury service. So you get a bunch of white people from the suburbs that would come in, and that's not representative either.
Right.
So the courts and we actually really had to work hard to try and say, no, we need a representative jury here.
Yeah.
It's got it. So that's another problem that I think the courts need to address.
Yeah. No, that's great. Thank you for even saying that and calling that out, because it is so very important. And when you talk about the financial aspect, it does affect a lot of people of color many times, right? A lot of us don't have the abilities to just miss work. And so while we deserve and should be on the juries for some of these cases, and, in order to give people a fair trial, the system is not always set up in a way that allows us to. And so there is just more work that has to be done in making sure that the actual people from the community can be a part of that. So anyway, thank you for saying that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I can only imagine the summons coming in the mail. Half the time, people might throw it out. They don't check their mail.
Well, and for so long, the narrative around jury selection has been like, oh, I don't want to go. Who wants to go? Like that is the immediate reaction for so long. I feel like when I became of age, got my first jury summons, all I knew was to be upset about it. That's what I did. Not because I actually was upset, but just because I thought that I should be upset about it,
Yeah.
And so, just changing the narrative and making sure people understand the importance of it is important.
Well, it's changing the narrative. It's making it accessible and easy.
Yeah.
I mean, you talk about throwing the jury summons out. A lot of people do that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's some statistics who say at least half the people throw out their jury summons.
Yeah.
There's other aspect there that I think we really have to address, which is in some states, there's some people and people of color, they don't want to go to a courthouse.
Right.
They associate that with terrible experiences.
100%.
And stuff. So why would I show up for jury service when I've only had bad experiences in a courthouse there?
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's a lot that needs to be done with, systemic racism and some issues here. And, there's the Trust in Justice Project. We're spending a lot of time focusing on what are the things that are making people mistrustful of the system. And that's a big part of it is people say it has been kind of rigged against people of color and also for people with money.
Yeah.
So there's a lot that needs to be done to, I think, restore a lot of trust.
Tell us again the name of the project, the Trust in Justice System?
Trust in Justice Project. Yeah.
Oh, project. Okay.
We're going to be, we did a big survey a year ago. We just ran 11 focus groups.
Wow.
Across the country to find out how people think about the system, how people think about our Supreme Court, obviously very controversial right now.
Yep.
And we're just about to put out a report on that.
Wow.
I have two more questions.
Okay.
At any point, are you talking to the jury, or are you just relating questions to the lawyer and to the judge, and then they talk to the jury?
I don't talk to the jury. I'm not a lawyer, so it's.
I'm not a lawyer, but sorry,
I'm not a lawyer, but yeah, no, I don't talk to them. I give questions to the attorneys. The only time I talk to a jury sometimes is after a trial.
Okay. After
the jury comes back, I sometimes will interview the jurors and talk to them and go, what moved you? It's like right now, you mentioned the Karen Reed case. That was a hung jury. I would be so fascinated to talk to those jurors and go, talk to me. What were the things that some people said? Yeah, I think she's guilty. Or what were the things that people said? No, you can't convict her of that.
Well, and with that case, what's also interesting is after that hung jury, the defense has now said 5 jurors have reached out to them to say, we actually voted not guilty on 1 and 3, which I was like, oh, this is all interesting because what was spoken about in the motions is that the jurors, according to the defense, said that they almost didn't feel they were waiting for the opportunity or for someone to ask them. So you're saying hung, but is it on all three? And because it was never asked, they never said it, which was, I get it, because I would do the same because it's all intimidating. But
what
now,
a mess.
what a
I mean,
mess.
so unnecessary. You have this huge long trial here, and they were going to acquit her on these 2 charges.
Yeah.
But obviously it wasn't clear to them. They must have thought, oh, well, if you're hung on one, you just have to say you're hung.
Yes.
And I mean, this was where I think sometimes the courts do fall down. They don't. This is why I say we're translators,
Yeah.
is because I really do believe sometimes a little more clarity in our court system would forego a problem like that.
100%.
And my last question
Yep.
is top 3 questions that you ask the jury to get there, to find out who they are. If you're like, I need to know if this person is a good moral individual, I'm going to ask these questions for sure.
So it's tough. Typically, we're asking very case-specific questions.
Okay.
Because that is what's going to reveal to me, because that's going to tell me a little bit more about where's their compass going to point when they're listening to the case. So I'm at, whether it's a murder case, it's experience with law enforcement, or obviously, victimization, attitudes towards the justice system, things like that. But if I want to know more about them, I sometimes will ask questions like, have the attorneys ask questions like, well, the people who know you best, how would they describe you?
Ooh.
Okay.
I'm gonna start
I
asking.
want to know a little about personality, because nobody, you don't ask people, how would you describe yourself? Because no one is going to be accurate in how they describe themselves.
Because we don't know ourselves anyway.
Well, it's like asking me how much I weigh. I'm gonna take off 5 pounds every time.
Exactly. And so that's a question that I would ask. I would say, I'd say, tell me what's bothering you the most right now. So I just want to find out sort of where there is the main thing. I just want them talking.
Yeah.
The more I get them talking, the more I get a sense of who they are as a person. Sometimes judges are a little bit wishy-washy in terms of allowing really personal questions. So I'll just say, I'll ask the attorney, tell me about your job. What do you like about your job? What do you not? Just to get them talking about it.
Yeah.
I also like to find out that what's important to me is how they're going to interact with other jurors. So if I'm on the defense side, sometimes I'm just looking for high conflict jury because I don't want the conviction. If I'm on the prosecution side, I want everybody to get along. So I'm asking questions like, how often do you work with other people? What are the things you like about working with other people or don't like?
Yeah.
So I want to see how they get along. So those are some of the things that I want to find out about.
Cool.
I love this. This was so amazing. Thank you so much for sharing and doing this. This is absolutely fascinating. I just want to ask the Patreon, if you guys have any questions, put them in the chat now, just before we let Mr. Gabriel go.
Mr. Gabriel, so why would someone choose a jury consultant over being a lawyer? Because it seems like you would probably have to know the law as well. And it seems like there's a lot of data and reading going on with lawyers and jury consultants.
So great question. I've been doing this a long time, so I know a lot about the law.
Okay.
I spent a lot of time in legal cases, so you acquire that. But I would say it's more of a disadvantage to be a lawyer because lawyers are trained to think in a very particular way, in a very linear, logical way. What we spend our time as jury consultants, we're trying to understand what are the emotional components of a case that are going to affect the jury's decision making. What are the psychological aspects of the person? What are their personalities? What are the behavioral elements of the case? What's the story of the case? These are things that attorneys really aren't trained in. So that's typically why people would hire us, because in some cases they don't need us, but in a lot of cases, they don't understand really how juries make decisions. And that's why they typically bring me in.
Are there instances in which jurors from outside of the community would be brought in for a trial? Or would it just would the trial just have to be moved to a different county?
So where the case is filed is usually there's only going to be people in that community. So in a state court case, jurors are called from the county in which they're called. In a federal case, it's a series of counties in that jurisdiction.
Oh.
That also, when you're in Los Angeles federal court here, you're typically bringing people in from Santa Barbara and Ventura counties as well.
Interesting.
In there. So there's a bigger jurisdiction for federal court there. That being said, every once in a while you do a change of venue motion like we did in Casey Anthony, in which you say, you know what, or in the Scott Peterson case too, in which case they say, you know what, people have been so sort of inundated with this case that it's going to be too hard to pick a jury here.
Yeah.
And in Casey Anthony, we actually went to Tampa and picked the jury and then brought them back to Orlando for that trial.
Oh, interesting.
So that can happen.
Okay.
Fresh minds.
Yeah.
You said and brought them back. Oh, okay. And this will be my last question. When it comes to a case like YSL or in high profile cases, but I'm specifically talking about this YSL trial, which has gone on for all of this time. These juror members have, actual trial, witness and testimony started in October, at the end of October. Here we are, right in July. Now we're on break. Realistically, these people who have been on this trial, who have been doing this for all this time, and now it's just a break with no explanation, and they're supposed to not consume or know anything going on with the case. Meanwhile, I'm making a video every day about what's happening in the case, right? On TikTok, on YouTube, on Twitter, on Facebook. It's everywhere. Realistically, do you think they don't know what's happening?
Realistically, of course they know what's happening. I mean, there are jurors who are very strict and very okay, I'm just going to follow. I'm going to try and do this thing. That being said, especially on a big break like this, the challenge with these high profile trials, and people ask me this about the Trump trial too. Oh, well, those jurors weren't sequestered and they were, everything was out about that trial well in advance of that trial.
Yes.
Same with the YSL case. I'm not sure there's any sort of new revelations that they're going to find about. The thing that's more important on a break, whether it's a week long or whether it's a month long, is they're not supposed to talk about the case. So what is the high pressure, the high profile cases is not just what are they going to be exposed to, but how pressured are they as jurors to come to a certain verdict? I've been involved in a lot of cases with unpopular defendants. I mean, Casey Anthony case, those jurors came back with acquittal. Some of them got death threats.
Oh my goodness.
It's such an unpopular thing there.
Yeah.
You always try to figure out what's the social pressure of a jury to come to a particular verdict. Yeah. That's a tough one.
That's good.
I'm all out.
I know. Okay, this is my last one for real. I'm gonna be done because somebody just asked it. Would you say, I think I watched an interview of yours where you said being a jury consultant is really, or trial consultant is really about being a behavior expert, like an expert on behavior. And one of the questions I just saw was, what a typical background then, or even for your background, like what is your background in? Is it psychology? Is it sociology? Is it like, what do you study to become an expert on people so you can then tell your kids when they have bad friends and that they shouldn't hang around?
Because
now every parent has the built-in measure on that.
Everybody got a human lie detector.
Don't hang out with that guy. But trial consultants come from a variety of different backgrounds. Some are clinical psychologists, some are social psychologists, some are lawyers that have developed this. There's some people who are dual degrees, they're PhD, JDs, and stuff like that. There's some people that are that come from different fields like marketing and even anthropology and stuff like that. It's a fairly unique field, so you kind of have to find your way. You have to know the law. You have to know psychology. You have to know social psychology. You have to be up on the literature of decision making and stuff like that. So that's a lot of it. I had an unusual background because my mom was a judge and my dad was a psychologist.
Oh, you merged.
And I also didn't want to do any of those things. So what did I do? I got theater training. So I was trained
I love
an actor. And there's a theatrical element to all trials. So there's some trial consultants with backgrounds. I mean, I got most of my sociology and psychology stuff later, but there's some great trial consultants who have theater backgrounds because they understand fundamentally that it's an audience that has to be impacted and be affected by a story.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good.
Yeah, you crossbred.
I know he did it all. Brought it all
with the
together.
perfection.
That
That's
is
awesome.
great. A perfect merging. Well, again, thank you so much for joining us. This was so fascinating. I can't even express how appreciative we are for you taking the time and answering all of the questions we threw at you today. We had like 10 last questions and you answered them all. So thank you. Is there anything you want to share or tell the audience? Is there a way to find you? Is there, you have this report coming out. How can we access that?
So, So my email is, my company's name is Decision Analysis Inc.
Okay.
We're all over the country. And so that's our website in case anybody wants to see who we are. I've written a bunch of things, including a book called Acquittal, in which I talk about the O.J. Simpson and the Casey Anthony and Phil Spector and Whitewater and Enron and all those cases, which is great, which is good. I've got a podcast actually coming out soon. Called Anatomy of an Argument.
Very cool.
It's going to be cool. And the Trust in Justice Project is something I'm very keen on. That we're going to have a report coming out very soon on that.
Okay.
And so I invite you to kind of contact us because we really do believe our justice system is, for the most part, I think one of the foundations of our democracy, and especially the jury's ability to do that. So I think it's important that we maintain the integrity of it. So that's what that project's all about, and about fair and equitable treatment of all groups in the system. So with that, I really thank you guys for inviting me on. It was a pleasure talking to you.
For sure.
This was awesome.
I know it was.
I'm excited for some reason.
To learn to dig more into it. Yeah. Okay, well, like I said, thank you again for being here. Thank you everyone for watching. We'll make sure we put all of Mr. Gabriel's information in the description box. And until next time, bye.
Take care.